Hey, 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 everybody. Good evening. It is time for Happy Hour with Dr. Lisa, and I am your host. I am your girl, Dr. Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me. Love your questions. Keep them coming in. The purpose of this podcast and my blog right now is to answer all of your questions that you have in psychology. So, from students to teachers to parents, whatever I can answer, I am going to start answering them on this podcast. If you go to my blog located at lisaligginschambers.com, so LISALIGGINS Chambers, CHAMBERS.com, that's where you will find a heading that says questions specially made for you. So if you go on there and you look down at the blog, you will see that I've already started answering your questions, and I'm really happy to do so. Some of you just need some extra processing and thoughts and advice about some of the things that are going on. So, for example, today I wrote a blog back in, I think, December that's called Question 3. Dr. Lisa's top 10 picks for after school games for children with ADHD. And I chose that based upon a question that came in about what to do with their kid after school when they're running around, and this child was diagnosed with ADHD. So I wrote that based upon that question. Speaking of questions, you all can email me. Some of you have at kids can see ghosts. Can't, I'm sorry, losing my train of thought. Kids can see ghosts at gmail.com. This is live and I'm not perfect, so I make mistakes, right? So I stumbled over my own email address. My number is 765-205-1959. You can always text me your questions as well. As you can see from the blog, I don't put any identifying information. I wouldn't do that to you also. That is that. So I look forward to hearing from you all. I did start this blog off with talking about my experiences with kids that can see ghosts. I still take those questions. I still want to talk about it. It's just not the focus of my public information right now. But I've written a lot in that area. So when you get a chance, just kind of look through the part of my blog that says ready with the question mark, and you will be able to see some of the stories that I wrote about kids that can see ghosts, which I had experiences with for many, many years. Right now, I'm not seeing kids in that capacity where they can just kind of sit back and talk to me about those things. I am working more with little ones now, 4 years old and under, so they don't really talk about that kind of stuff. So we are shifting gears, and I am thrilled. So, listen, I got a question that came to me, and I thought, man, this is a good one. This is a good one because of everything that I do talk about publicly. The one thing that I don't talk about as much as I probably should is my experiences with ethics. And so, this would be a really good one if you're a student to hear. And so this question was, have I ever had an experience where I was asked to do something that would violate my ethics code? And what happened and how did I handle it? And I thought, man, that's a genius question because I don't even talk about that stuff. But I do have a story. So those of you who have been listen now for a while, you know I have a story, right? Well, actually, I have a couple of these stories, but one, the best one is this one. So I was working for a school district and was asked to do something unethical. And I'm going to tell you what I was asked, and then I'll tell you why it was unethical and what I did about it. I was asked to assess a child who already had autism. And I was asked to do it as a favor to someone and do it because they told me to. And so when I asked specific questions about the reason that this kid needed more testing because this kid just had testing a year prior to this request. But also, most kids with IEPs aren't evaluated unless you have a reason to every 3 years. And when I say reason, I mean just cause. I mean, there's some type of amendment that needs to be made to the IEP. You found out the child just has a new educational diagnosis or disability, anything, right, that would warrant testing. Well, this was simply do me a favor, right? And there are some people out there who behave that way, who will think that they're in good with you or that they have a right to, as this person did, request you to do what they want to do. And so, after some investigation, because that's what you should do to figure out what was going on, talking to the parents, this district was trying to stay out of due process and lawsuits from these parents by asking me to just go and test this kid. So, in other words, there was no reason to test child, none. They just didn't want to get their asses kicked in court, right? Over something that had to do with placement. Now, this was a kid who already had autism. This was a kid who was already placed, in special education classes geared toward his or her disability. Everything was already in place. Everyone was kind of shocked that, this person was asking to test basically to keep their asses out of court, like I said. So there was no reason to test the kid. And I said that. This is a child who already has services in place, has a IEP that's a year old, is already in appropriate classes, is actually doing very well, right? Considering, the intellect of this particular child. That's not to say that that is a condition that all kids with ASD or autism spectrum disorder have in common. Obviously, it's a spectrum for a reason. And this was a kid who was actually needed a lot more support. And so I said, I didn't think the kid needed testing. We just don't have a reason to test, right? And this person said, you do it because I told you to do it. And I said, no, I don't just do things that are unnecessary. Our jobs as psychologists are to protect the public. If we just say yes, we will do it just because somebody wants us to that way, it's not protecting the public. So my goal was to protect this child from harm because that's what we're supposed to do. Harm could mean stressing this kid out, testing this kid too much, changing services and placement that was actually working for this child. Parents actually agree with me. Yeah, well, this person wanted to fire me, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I quit. For one, I've never been fired. I wasn't going to be fired. I'm not doing that with any job, period, right? I felt like I was right. I felt like this could have been discussed more than being so aggressive with wanting to terminate employment. However, that's what this person wanted to do. So I went and wrote up a nice, nasty letter of resignation and basically told her what she was telling me, which was to kiss my butt and I don't need the job and I'm not violating my ethics. You always maintain your ethics. You always take a stand, over your ethics. You don't let that override law, right? If it does, and you try to come up with a way to resolve the problem that will be ethically sound and also abide by law. This had nothing to do with that. This was just a violation of ethics because I felt like it would have put the kid in harm. Okay. So, needless to say, that's not the first time that I was asked to do something unethical. My position has always been, and it should be, is that you don't violate your ethics code if you are a psychologist. If you guys want to know about the ethics code, just go to the American Psychological Association's website and put in code of ethics, and it is there, folks, for you to take a look at, all of us. So here's the thing. The answer is yes. I've been asked to do things in the past before that and said no to. So I just always go back to my ethics. So that was a great question. Those of you who are aspiring psychologists and or are young psychologists, because I know several young meaning within about 7 years to me in the field, you will be asked to do something unethical. You'll be asked go out on a date by one of your clients. That's happened to me too. And what do? The answer is no. No, you don't do that. One of the issues that I always have with our state board exam is that there are so many lawsuits against psychologists for sexual misconduct. You can kind of see how it happened with regard to people already being under undue influence, right? And so when you take care of people and they get attached to you, sometimes their feelings cross onto you, or they transfer how they feel onto you. You're easy to talk to, you're a psychologist. You have to be mindful of that and deal with it and not violate your ethics. So I think that our state board should ask more questions about ethics on these licensing exams, and they don't ask enough. And so they're not a true measure of what we can do with the public as far as our skills. But I do know that we should uh, do more to make sure that some of the rates of violations go down as opposed to staying where they are and increasing. Guys, one way to do that is to maintain your ethics, deal with it, consult with your colleagues. I've done that for years. I have colleagues that I'll call right now and say, what do you think? How do you think I should handle this? What do you think I'll do? And there will be times when you have to transfer clients to other people because they do fall for you. It is not uncommon for that to happen. So be mindful of those things and take care of them. So yeah, I can answer ethics questions as well, based upon my experiences and how I've handled them, and including, parents who don't agree with diagnoses, or parents who are upset and they want to call, and report, or they believe they have just cause to do XYZ, or they don't agree with your analyses or your diagnoses. You have to be able to work with your parents. I always tell my parents that I work with that we work as a team. Right? We have a team mentality. I join their family. Some of you that are psychologists know what that means. I join them and we work together to get through testing or therapy when I was doing therapy, or, we work together to figure out what numbers mean, so data. So I'm a team player with my parents that we diagnose together. So you guys remember those kind of things. And I think parents appreciate that. Oops, sorry, that was my keypad. They are the experts, okay? And make sure you help them to see that they are the experts. They live with their kids, they know their kids well, and they want to feel that way. So I pair up, I empower my parents, I pair up with them, and we get things done. So I hope that answers that person's question. Another question that came in was all about numbers. It was an interesting question. You guys are talented in asking questions. You ask questions that, of course, I don't think about because I do it. So here's another one. How do you read data? It's a great question. How do you read it? Oh, gosh. It would take me about 5 years to teach you how to read data. So I'll tell you what I do with my parents. I make it really simple. One of the things that I do is when I show them data, I point them to the areas that I'm looking at that are specific to the condition that we're viewing for their child. So let's just say it was ADHD, right? inattentiveness, hyperactivity, impulsivity, right? And we had some testing. We did an IQ test. Well, I'm only going to interpret mostly the part of the test that applies to what we look for in cognitive ability. That can be a deficit for their child because of inattentiveness. So when you think about inattentiveness, you think about memory, short attention span, sustaining their attention. Okay. You think about their verbal skills, typically higher, things like that. I'm just giving you guys examples. And so when I talk to them, I mostly talk to them the way that schools will, because their kids are in school. So you want to speak at their level, meaning what they understand about the condition. So you don't want to talk over their heads. You want to, with them, have a conversation. So one of the things that I do with them too is I keep checking in. I keep saying, I just told you, for example, this is an example. All of these are examples. Let's just say I said the memory score is lower, Numbers depend on each test. So some tests average can start at 90, other tests it can start at 86. It just depends on the test. So I'm just going to call a number out at random. Let's just say it was 20, right? Average was 20. Well, if there was a score on an IQ test, what I do sometimes if the score is really low like that, I will talk about the age equivalent, compare that to the age the kid is now, and talk about where to focus in schools. You see? So then parents are not feeling so upset at numbers, so anxious about what numbers mean, but we take it to a level of comprehension where they can understand how to apply these things in school or IEPs and interventions that they can do or that the school can do and what I think should be on the IEPs and stuff like that. So you make it a whole conversation. That's what I do to answer the data question. Now I can get into, numbers, right? Most parents don't really care about the numbers. They want to know what this stuff means, how it impacts their child, what can be done about it, and where they should go. How should they move forward? They don't really care about, okay, what does an 85 mean? You can say what it means. If I was talking to another psychologist, I probably would get into more details about statistics. But with parents who are not psychologists, they just want to know, how do you help my kid, right? That's the important thing. So work with them as a team. They will appreciate that from you. And that's what I do. So I hope that answered that question. If you have more number of questions, just ask me. We'll keep going with it. Again, it just depends on each test. You know, Somebody asked me directly, they told me my IQ was 116. What does that mean? And I said, you have to go back to the person that tested you and ask them specifically what it means. Okay. You don't interpret data for people that you haven't worked with. You send them back to the person that tested them. So I don't answer direct questions like that. Personal questions, more general questions, such as, how do you interpret data? So I really appreciate your questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Keep them coming up. So speaking of ADHD, if you go over to the blog, you will see that I gathered 10 games that I really like for kids who are busy or have ADHD, or if you're just trying to find some games for you to do after school other than their tablets and talking on their cell phones to their parents. You guys can play games together. I put 10 different games that I picked out right on Amazon. You can click the link on my website and it'll take you straight to these games. A couple of these games we used to play when we were kids back in the 80s. Yep, I'm an 80s kid, you guys. And so, for example, Simon, remember Simon with the lights? And you just kind of point, Simon with the lights? Well, yeah. And so that's a really good game to teach kids some spatial skills and learning patterns and how to sustain their attention long enough to be able to follow the lights. You wouldn't think about that. Like, that's not something that my parents thought about when I had the game assignment. But it's something that I think about now, even with kids that have autism, because some kids with autism, they like to stare at lights. So why not teach them how to follow patterns as they stare at lights? So I like that one a lot. I also like games that develop a child's ability to better. So when you look at different focus games, I put one on my website. You can do that. I love educational games. I love STEM games in particular. I actually buy my own kids' STEM games. Um, Science, technology, engineering, and math. My son is really good at math. And so I like to always recommend a bunch of STEM games because I think, for one, we don't have enough kids, especially girls, in the sciences. So I like to have those kind of games, especially to help build those math skills. So math, as you guys know, is practice, practice, practice. Even when talking about data, so even when I do talk to parents, I have in the past and I still do, about how to build those math skills. Math is all about processing and doing it over and over and over again. What better way to do it than a STEM game? Okay, so try that. And then I put, remember the Rubik's Cube that we used to have? I think they still sell the Rubik's Cube, but now it's so advanced. There are games, and I put one on my website where they have lights now and different patterns. So you're talking about sustaining attention. Fidget toys, things like that with lights, those things will sustain their attention. Family games. Scrabble is a good one. I think Scrabble is a very good one. I actually have that. My kids have a lot of games. They're kind of outgrown games though. I don't know what's wrong with those kids, but I'm just joking. But we have Scrabble. I put Picasso tiles on there too. I actually bought Picasso tiles over Christmas for my own kids. I like the tile games. I like the fine motor coordination that it will give to your kids. I like the colors. I like the sounds when they fall. What else do I like about it? I like how you can build different things. So you let them just go. Their imagination after school, when break, throw those tiles on the table. And kids just, they have those tiles at different children's museums too. So when you see them at the museums, the children's museums, you'll see a bunch of kids playing with those tiles, and that's what gave me the idea. So I was in Chicago, and I went. I think it was a children's museum because they actually have a part of that museum where they can play with water, and so I think that's where I saw it, and I saw the Picasso tiles, and I thought, man, I can get those tiles for my kids, and I can also recommend them because they remind me of building blocks too, which I also put on my website. So building blocks are great. The other thing I like, the straws, the creativity toys. There are a bunch of straws that you can use. Try those as well. So I was really very, very happy when I put these games up because I felt like they were very um, important games for all of you and to share with people that you know because they do help increase a lot of critical thinking skills in these kids as well. It increases their focus. It increases their planning. You know, this is all a part of those frontal lobes where we have all of these functions, executive functioning, where we're able to sustain attention, where we pay, where we do some spatial relations, and where we deal with a lot of different you know, social emotional learning and memory and a lot of good games on here. I'm looking at them now that increase, some of those skills that we see that get, what am I thinking about? Not blocked from, but suppressed when it comes to, symptoms of ADHD. So I like them. Check them out when you get a chance. Next week, we are going to keep talking about your questions. I'm going to talk to the preschool parents next week. My preschool parents that I know of have gotten so frustrated. And that's why I chose the blog that I wrote for next week. So I look forward to seeing you guys then. Thank you so much for joining me. And you all have a good night. Bye bye.